right, so in the world of competitive card games, you've got your powerful strategies, you've got your clever strategies, and then you've got the ones that feel like they just break the very rules of the game. Today, we are diving deep into probably the most explosive, controversial, and honestly fascinating strategy in all of Yu-Gi-Oh, the first turn kill, or FTK. Yeah, we're talking about the art of winning before your opponent even draws their first card. So how is that even possible? Let's find out. I mean, really think about that for a second. What if the most important part of the match was just the coin flip? What if your whole deck was just a perfectly tuned machine designed to solve a puzzle and declare victory, all on turn one? Look, this isn't some crazy hypothetical. It's the absolute core philosophy behind one of the most intellectually demanding and debated archetypes in the game's entire history. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to kick things off by digging into the history of the FTK. You know, from its early days as basically a myth to its total dominance of the meta. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how these things are actually built. After that, we'll look at the advanced thinking that separates the pros from everyone else. We'll also see how the game itself fought back, and we'll wrap it all up by asking the big question. Is the FTK a flaw in the game, or is it the ultimate expression of skill?
Okay, so to really get the FTK, we have to go all the way back to its roots. Because before it became this finely tuned winning machine, it was more like a rumor, a legend that duelists would whisper about. Let's just lock in the definition right here so we're all on the same page. An FTK is exactly what it sounds like, a first turn kill. This is not about building a big, unbreakable board or slowly grinding out an advantage. No, this is about one decisive, preemptive strike that ends the duel before it even really starts. Your opponent has zero say in the matter. It's the ultimate non-interactive victory. And what's so wild is that in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, a real FTK was basically like seeing a unicorn. It was a happy accident, right? A 1 in a million hand that you'd be telling your friends about for weeks. These were not consistent strategies you could build a deck around. They were more like dueling folklore. And this timeline just lays it out perfectly. You go from these humble, pure luck beginnings right into the Chaos Emperor Dragon era. And that was when everything changed. All of a sudden, with cards like Chaos Emperor Dragon, players had the tools to make FTKs consistent. It went from a what-if to a terrifying, tournament-winning threat. It got so out of hand that Konami had to step in with emergency bans, which completely reshaped the game. And that brings us to today, the modern era, where FTKs aren't about just one busted card anymore. They're these intricate engineering marvels built on probability and perfect sequencing. So that leads us to the how, right? How do you actually build one of these modern marvels? Well, it turns out there's a super strict set of principles that the best FTK players live by. This is not about just jamming a bunch of powerful cards together. This is disciplined, almost mathematical deck construction. These are basically the 4 commandments of building a serious FTK deck. First off, every single card has a job. It's either a starter that gets your combo going, an extender that keeps it alive, or a fixer that can unbrick a bad hand. No deadweight. Second, you stick to 40 cards. Why? It's all about maximizing the odds of drawing what you need. Any more than that, and you better have a spreadsheet proving why it's better. Third, you gotta do your homework. That means goldfishing, testing hands against no opponent over and over again. We're talking at least 100 hands just to see how often you can actually win. And finally, it has to be a true FTK. You win on your first turn before your opponent's main phase won. Anything less is a failure. Let's just sit with this number for a second. 100 plus. And that's the minimum. The best players are testing hundreds, maybe even thousands of hands, meticulously tracking their kill rates, their brick rates, everything. This is exactly why the idea that FTK decks are lazy or brain dead is just so wrong. The best FTK players aren't just combo players, they're statisticians, they're risk managers, they're building from a spreadsheet first and then with cards second. Okay, so we've got the basic rules of construction down. Now, let's take it up a notch. We're going to look at the high-level, big-brain strategies that separate someone who just memorized a combo from a true master who can win from almost any hand.
A competitive FTK is never a straight line from A to B. It's more like a labyrinth, a huge decision tree where every single move you make opens some doors and closes others. One wrong turn, one tiny little mistake in how you sequence your plays, and the whole thing can just fall apart. Mastering these complex paths is what the game is all about at this level.
So our first advanced concept is something called line collapsing. Okay, imagine your win condition needs 4 specific cards. The odds of opening all 4, not great. Line collapsing is the genius art of using clever card choices and overlapping engines to get that same result with just 2 cards. A card that searches another piece, for example, essentially acts as 2 cards at once. When you do this right, it dramatically, and I mean dramatically, boosts the consistency of the entire deck. Next up, we've got hand trap mapping. This is like playing a game of mental chess before you even put a card on the table. A master FTK player looks at their opening 5 cards and immediately starts charting out the possibilities. They're asking, okay, what hand traps could my opponent have? Which ones beat me? All right, what's my line of play that can beat those specific hand traps? They'll even sequence their plays in a weird way on purpose, just to bait out a weaker response from the opponent, saving their more resilient plays for the real threats. It's this deep, predictive level of strategy. Every FTK deck has them. We call them garnets. These are cards you have to run in your deck, but you absolutely never want to draw. Opening one can feel like game over. But the best players have a solution: dead card recycling. They build their decks with engines that let them discard these useless cards in their hand to draw new ones, effectively turning a dead card, a brick, into fresh gas to keep the combo going. It's all about turning a potential loss into a win. Now this might be the most important concept of all: fail case optimization. See, a good FTK deck wins on turn 0, but a great FTK deck, it wins on turn 0, or if the opponent actually manages to stop it, it pivots into a brutal plan B. This means even if the main FTK gets stopped, the player can still end their turn on a board that locks the opponent out, or sets up a powerful floodgates, or just forces them to burn all their resources. It punishes the opponent for even daring to interact. But here's the thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! The game is always evolving. The game itself and the players, they didn't just sit back and let FTK decks take over everything. This led to a kind of arms race between the FTK and the rest of the metagame. Now, to understand the counterplay, you have to understand just how bad the problem was. Going first in Yu-Gi-Oh is always a big advantage. In a normal format, the player going first usually wins around 65% of the time. But in a format with a consistent, powerful FTK deck, that number shoots up to over 90%. The FTK just cranks the first turn advantage to an insane level, making that coin flip basically the whole game. Something had to change. And the answer came in the form of hand traps. These are incredible cards you can activate straight from your hand during your opponent's turn. Cards like Ash Blossom were an absolute game changer. They finally gave the player going second a way to fight back on turn 0. By hitting the FTK player's combo at just the right choke point, they act as this desperately needed speed bump. And this is the result. Thanks to hand traps, trying to pull off an FTK today isn't some lonely game of solitaire anymore. It's this interactive dance. The FTK player is trying to weave through their combo lines, while the opponent is looking for that one perfect moment to jump in and stop them. It completely transformed what used to be a non-interactive strategy into a complex puzzle of navigation and counterplay. So yeah, the impact was absolutely massive. Hand traps created genuine interaction on the very first turn. This added so much strategic depth, and it pushed FTK decks from being these format-warping monsters into more of a niche, high-skill strategy. Now, if you want to succeed with an FTK, you have to build it and pilot it expecting to get hit with disruption, which makes the whole thing way, way more challenging. So, after all that, where does this leave us? What is the FTK's real role in the game today? It is still, without a doubt, one of the most hotly debated topics in the entire community. And it really all boils down to a clash between perception and reality. See, on one side, you've got the controversy. A lot of players see FTKs as low interaction, boring, and just unfair. You hear them called cheap wins or autopilot decks. But the reality, as we've hopefully shown, is just so much more nuanced. The good ones are incredibly complex probability puzzles. They require a ton of mathematical precision and deep strategic thought. And in today's game with hand traps everywhere, they are not unbeatable. They are solvable puzzles. You just have to know where their choke points are. I think this quote just nails it, really. FTKs are not degenerate autopilot decks. The good ones are math-driven, sequencing tight, and brutally unforgiving of mistakes. The ones that actually top tournaments are anything but autopilot. They're built on a foundation of math. They demand flawless play, and a single mistake from the person playing the deck can mean it all just falls apart. They reward mastery, not laziness. And that brings us right back to our final big question. Is the very existence of the first turn kill a fundamental design flaw in Yu-Gi-Oh? Or Is it the ultimate test of a player's skill, a challenge of deck building, probability, sequencing, and mental strength all rolled into one? The real answer is probably somewhere in the middle, but one thing's for sure. The FTK is one of the deepest, most mind-bending rabbit holes this entire game has to offer. What do you all think?